fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
We were talking about travel, and I guess we don't need to dwell too much on it, but I never really talked about it before, but we had talked about in the past the mind of the retiree. And this is a phenomenon I've always found fascinating. And I'm not trying to pin this on anyone, and maybe it's different across cultures. I don't know. But also, I think a lot of cultures don't really have this Western retire thing, like a Chinese, an Asian person, an African person, South American person. I think they just assume they're going to work until they die. And it's kind of really with the boomers, it was this like, I'm going to work until I'm 60, I guess is the time that happens. And then those are the golden years. The idea of the tail end of your life being the golden years where you can actually do stuff is a relatively new phenomena, I think. Whereas everyone else thought, like, all I need to do is have enough money so I can sit in a chair and not have to till a field.
Yeah.
Here, there's the idea that, and I've had family members who do this. They'll say, that's actually, I'm working my entire life just to have that block of time where I don't need to work. I'm going to work a job I hate just so I can have 20 years where you can, I'm doing everything I want to, and it never happens.
And they've deluded themselves into thinking that those 20 years are going to be like a block of time that is equal in quality to the previous 50 years. When clearly it's not. Like, even if you're very healthy at 60, it's not the same thing as you touring when you're 30. So
yeah. And also the idea is that of those 20 years, let's say it's 20, if we're being nice, like maybe you live to 90 or something, but let's say it's 20, you'll only be pretty mobile for 10 of those. Like this happened to my grandparents, my grandfather who passed last year, but he had significant surgery. He had his kneecaps replaced. I think he had a pacemaker. And this is common. There's a lot of guys, especially, who get back problems, you get knee problems. You got to get some shit done to your legs. And then you get a point where you won't get insurance anymore. They won't insure you to fly. So he couldn't fly for the last 10 years of his life. So it's like, okay, well, I hope you got travel out of your system, because the powers that be won't let you do it anymore unless you, I guess, get your own plane.
Yeah.
And even then, maybe not. So it's like, and then these are the, your golden years, but gold, it also means sunset. Sunsets are beautiful, but it's also things are going down. You're not going to be capable of doing a lot of stuff. So but everyone has these dreams in their head that and this is what we said before about hobbies. Everyone says, my mom was bad at this too, in a way, where she's like, I retire, I want to travel. My law is that in retirement, you're only ever going to do what you did before you're retired. You don't usually get a new thing. The people who say, I'm going to paint, or I'm going to get into fixing cars. It's like, no, you're not. Unless you're fixing cars before. But I've never seen it done. Maybe it's on a rare edge case, fine, but I've never seen it done. And I know a lot of retired people. They kind of just do what they did in life. And if they didn't do anything, then their retirement is pathetic and sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my aunt and uncle, they traveled when they retired, but they were big travelers before. Like they didn't have any kids and they had government jobs, and it was a sweet thing, but they loved travel. They went to Italy and they did all this stuff. And then in retirement, they kind of did it for a while. And then when they would talk about travel, it's like, yeah, I guess we're going to Italy again. Because there's not a lot of places in the world these types of people want to travel to. Like open a map. And to your average, they weren't boomers, I don't think, like Gen Xers maybe. But then look at a map, it's like, okay, let's put a big X over the places you don't want to go. Africa. Like maybe there's 2% of Africa you want to go to. Maybe South America, there's a couple places that are safe for your type of personality. The type of Western white person you are, where you get spooked very easily by things. And you're very troubled by people not speaking the language. And you're... you want a service that will make you feel essentially like you want like a black guy to take you on a safari.
Right.
Yeah, there's some of that, but that's very small pockets, right?
If you were a person whose interest in travel was motivated by some narrow idiosyncratic interest, such as the history of the Roman Empire, the history of the Catholic Church, the history of architecture, maybe medieval warfare, any of those people could easily spend 3 straight years touring every little shitheel town in Italy. But I agree with you. The average person who hears that or considers that and then responds with, "Oh, me too. I love to travel. I just loved to see the world." Now, what you mean is you would love to have a 3.5 hour guided bus tour of Florence and then the following day, Rome. And then that's it. You're done. And if you ever went back, you'd do the exact same trip, just you'd do it again with the same tour guide.
Yeah. And there are trips for people who make this sound right here. They go, oh. Those are the people when they see something and they make that noise.
Yeah.
And then they just want to be kind of, you hold their hand, you take them, say, look at the Colosseum. And, you know, there's certain things I want to do that though, but I want to do it just because I got a weird bucket list where I have traveled before and I like it. And I don't care. I'll do the tourist thing. I'll go see. Everyone says if you go to see the Colosseum, it's not as good as you'd think. I'm like, well, I don't care. I just want to go, and I'll complain about it. But I want to go see like the pyramids. That'd be nice. And I know it's trash. I know it sucks. I know you're surrounded by screaming brown guys wearing plastic bags on their heads. But I know, whatever. I'll go do it, and I'll my dream in life is to have all my dreams smashed. I'm fine with that.
You want to finally have all of that ruined. You're convinced that it's a horrible experience. You just want to prove it to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, my bucket list only has 2 items. I want to, first of all, lose all hope, and second of all, die. That's my bucket list. And, you know, I think I could start early on that and just coast the rest of the time. But we were talking before, because you're talking about cruises, and you're talking about you actually went on a cruise in China to the Potemkin villages. And is there anything else you wanted to say to that? Because it sounds kind of strange. You went recently, right?
I went, it was about 3 or 4 years ago that we went. And it was, I think it's probably worse now, but it was already bad then. But no, it was just the general idea that it's kind of like what you were just saying. Like I expected it to be bad, and it's worse than I could have imagined. And actually the big shock to me was not how bad it was. The shock was everybody else on the trip thought it was amazing. Even on the way back, like in the airport, people were raving about the value. Like, well, I mean, yes, there were some things that I might have improved, but I'm not going to complain, because if you look at the price, this was a really good price. And it's like, it's 2.5 weeks of your life. A lot of you people are going to be dead in 5 years. This is what you wanted to spend your money on. Don't you have grandkids you could be spending time with? What was this? This was nothing. This was like, I could have given you more value by driving you around in the parking lot of an AMC for 2 weeks. That's what this was. It's not.
It's funny. It's funny because the people are more in love with the idea of travel, saying I traveled or being a traveler. Whereas you had raised a good point there, where it's like, if you were into Roman architecture, if you were into French history, you could go to these places and maybe go off the beaten path to things that serve as that. But if you're just the person who has like a fucking talisman in their head where it's like, I'm going to be a travel. I'm going to travel. So they're just doing this thing called traveling. It doesn't really matter where it is. It doesn't really matter. But that's why they care so much about the money, where it's like, I got a good deal on this experience. And the experience was saying I traveled. I read this book recently. Yeah, it's this book called Nudge. This is the final edition. There have been other editions by Richard H. Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Oh, no!
I've actually heard, I think I read something by her, Cass Sunstein, recently. I recognize
I'm sure he's good. I'm sure he's actually, like, a lot of these social scientists are interesting. And this is an interesting book because this had real world effects. And there's a lot of examples given in the book, because this is like the final edition. So this would have come out years and years ago. And the things outlined in this book have been adopted as policy by a lot of government institutions. And I think it was like Obama specifically. But I think this has been in practice for a long time. So the book Nudge, it's about, in short, social manipulation. It's about how to guide the masses to do what you want with little tiny incremental baby steps. And so when we talk about how, society got a certain way or how certain things got so corrupt, and it's mainly because it's it's not done in huge social swings and changes in public policy. It's done in little incremental steps. So the way they describe in the book, it's called choice architecture. I never heard that before, but in the book it outlines how this has been adopted again by Obama about how to change dietary habits of a population.
So the idea of choice architecture is that every environment where we're making a choice is actually shaping our decisions to some extent. So the canonical example is the cafeteria. We've all been in a cafeteria, so this will be a familiar context. When you walk into a cafeteria and you pick up a tray and you go to the front of the line, some food is presented to you first. And that first thing you encounter is much more likely to end up on your tray and therefore in your stomach than the very last thing you reach at the end of the cafeteria line. Because by then your tray is full. Even if it looks absolutely delightful, you have to go put something else back in order to put this. And who does that, right? So what this means is that whoever designed the cafeteria and decided what came first and what came last, whether they realized it or not, they were a choice architect.
About how to get them used to new policies. And reading this book, he kind of makes a point in it that I summarized as, if there is a social change or something you don't like about society, odds are it was done on purpose. I don't buy that it was accidental. Now, I don't really believe in motivations. I don't care about specific evil schemes, motivations. I care about phenomena. But this describes how phenomena happen and how a lot of the things that, like daylight savings time is an example. Everyone complains about daylight savings time. And if you were to ask your average person, they would think it's just like a dumb thing that's on the books and we don't know why we do it. It's like, no, it's on purpose. The reason we have daylight savings time is on purpose. Every single policy that the government has isn't there just because it's a holdover from some bygone time. It's very carefully done that way for a reason. And I think if you want to engage in public policy, if you want to look at why governments do what they do, come at it by saying that everything you don't like is because someone implanted it there for a reason. It's important to figure out that reason. But when he talks about choice architecture, he says there's no such thing as neutral choices. There's only choice architects in society. And this is why I said what was it, like that line, don't blame anything on malice that can be blamed on ignorance, is wrong. And so in the book, they describe, people might groan at this, but this book was written by two libertarian-minded guys. And the system that they've created, a lot of people will argue that this isn't, in fact, libertarianism. And I will get to that in a second. But he calls the system they're proposing libertarian paternalism.
And the idea behind libertarian paternalism, or nudge, is that you have things that are like a GPS device. So a GPS device is a form of libertarian paternalism. If you don't like the instructions you're getting from the little voice that's coming in your car, you can say, I want the scenic route, or I prefer a direction which is more familiar to me and I know better than you do given what I care about. But it's steering you in a direction which it has information suggesting is the best way to get you where you want to go.
So it's a practice of giving someone a binary choice to force them to choose what you want. In a sense, it's like, in economical terms, telling people that we're in a free market and we're not really. We're not in a free market. We've never been in a free market. But people believe they're in a free market. Like, people believe in voting. You're giving them a choice. And everyone kind of knows that, okay, I'm given a binary choice, really. I can vote this way or I can vote that way. Even if there's multiple parties, realistically, you're probably voting one or the other. And we know that binary choice doesn't really matter. And that binary choice was manufactured by a larger power structure. You know what I mean? And everyone kind of knows that. But it's like, okay, imagine voting but with fucking everything. Everything is Coke versus Pepsi. Coke versus Pepsi, which is just, they want you to drink pop, is the idea, right? And so he talks about it here. In the United Kingdom, former Prime Minister David Cameron, the leader of the Conservative Party, embraced nudging and created the world's first team devoted solely to this effort, officially called the Behavioral Insights Team, but often called the Nudge Team. In the United States, former President Barack Obama, a Democrat and liberal, also embraced the basic idea, directed his agencies to adopt numerous nudges, and created a nudge unit of its own, originally known as the Social and Behavioral Sciences Team, now called the Office of Evaluation Sciences. The United States Agency of International Development has an assortment of programs that use behavioral science and insights. In the years since this book was originally published, governments around the world, spanning the political landscape, have incorporated these and related ideas in an effort to make their programs more efficient and effective. There are behavioral insight teams or nudge teams of various kinds in numerous nations, including Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, Finland, Singapore, the Netherlands, France, Japan, India, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. A great deal of relevant work is being done by the World Bank, the United Nations, and the European Commission. In 2020, the World Health Organization created a behavioral insights initiative focusing on numerous public health issues, including pandemics, vaccination uptake, and risk-taking by young people. Now, that's in the start of the book. That's them establishing, since this book was written, here's the actual policy infrastructure it has designed, just to kind of lead with that. The exact idea is outlined here. Consider an illustration from the American workplace. Most large employers offer a range of benefits, including such things as life and health insurance and retirement savings plans. Once a year in late fall, there is an open enrollment period where employees are allowed to revise the selections that they made the previous year. Employees are required to make their choices online. They typically receive by mail a package of materials explaining the choices they have and instructions on how to log on and make these choices. They also receive various reminders. Because employees are human, some neglect to log on, so it is crucial to decide what the default options are for the busy, absent-minded, and perhaps even overwhelmed employees. Usually the default is one or two options. Employees can be given the same option as those they chose the previous year, or the choice that can be set back to zero. Call these the status quo and back to zero options. How should the choice architect choose between these defaults? Libertarian paternalists would like to set the default by asking what thoughtful and well-informed employees would actually want. So this is kind of the mindset they're taking, that, look, we're designing a society. We need to decide what the defaults are, knowing that most people aren't actually going to make an active decision. And this is how they think in politics, too. They realize that we want to give everyone a choice, but we know the majority of people will not make a choice. And society will typically go based on whatever the defaults we set are. And then they take that and say, hey, if we give people an illusion of choice, then they're even more excited. Then they feel they participated. If we give them the illusion of choice, but make it as simple as possible, they actually go away. So you see this in a lot of businesses right now. Like, people know they'll never read the terms and conditions. We know that people, once they're set in something, will never change it. Salespeople know this all the time, that when people make a sale, it's very rare people return things. It's very rare people deviate from a decision already made. So that's what they call libertarian paternalism. It's essentially giving people the illusion of choice and giving them the default that you want them to take, and just making them feel better about taking that default. Now, the problem is some people hear that and they freak out. A lot of conspiracy people hear that and they hate that. But I do think it is a reality that you need to reckon with. And I don't think there's a more of an anarchistic solution where everyone becomes a full agent of their destiny. Like, throughout time, whatever the country is. This differs by country to country. Some countries are more collectivist than others, some less. But there is a reality even here in the West where most people, they don't even want to make decisions. They just want to go along to get along, and they don't want to take an active role. And what percentage of the population is that? That might be 60%. And so this is a new thing. This wasn't always done, giving people the illusion of control. Now, what do you think about that first? Now, what I've just said, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a somewhat pessimistic view of it. It's Pandora's box, right? Like, the technology and the understanding of this exists. It has been implemented. You can't unimplement it. I mean, an apocalypse would end it, but aside from that, this now exists, and you're coping with it. So
Yeah,
whatever.
well, and he says in the book, these two guys, they say there's two ways people think. They're either reflexive and automatic, or reflective and thoughtful. And their thing, and this is them saying, we're doing this to help people. We're doing this because, we're trying to create the best possible world. What they say is, we're trying to make the world safer for the majority of reflexive people, especially since we consider that people are reflexive in general. Everyone's reflexive a little bit. And we talked about game theory a while ago. Like, there's this idea of social conventions. A lot of people just go along with social conventions in the culture without thinking. So in a way, everyone's reflexive to a point. And they're trying to figure out, okay, what do people in control do to help the people who are just reflexive, who just kind of go along to get along, who don't think about things too deeply? Because it's unreasonable to demand that every single person in a society be very thoughtful about what to do, because they got other shit to do. They got kids, they got jobs, they got tomatoes to grow, But this is how the people in charge think about hijacking your decision-making process. And they have a really great example here. One example of how they would do this is when you're asking people questions, the order of how you ask the questions actually impacts their answer. So if you ask someone, how's your dating life? They'll say fine. But if you actually precede that question by saying, are you happy? How's your dating life? Suddenly their answer changes. So it's like asking multiple questions at once. You can guide their thought process and get them to believe and say different things as you're guiding them through that. So keep that in mind every time you're filling out a questionnaire. And maybe that's also the order of the voting card you're given, whose name is listed for every single thing is on purpose. This is back to the main point. The order of questions you're asked, the time of day you're told to do things, everything has a choice architecture aligned to it. And I think there is utility in everyone being aware of that as you exist in this nation. And we can apply this to everything just outside of politics, like news media, certain stories that follow other stories, words that are used before other words. The sequence of events is very, very important to the opinions people form and then carry out into the world. So that's why I always say things are on purpose. Now, we can not necessarily blame it on the elites, because I think this happens in every society. So I'm just trying to make people aware that if you wanted to create a counter narrative or a counter movement or a revolutionary movement, you need to employ these tactics. Now, if you're trying to break someone out of like Alex Jones say, break the conditioning, it's easier to do it this way, to guide people's thinking, to quote, red pill them. Instead of just taking a shotgun and loading it with uncomfortable truths and shooting them in the face with it, maybe take the reality or the truth you want them to understand and kind of feed them through a sequence. You have to guide their thinking, is what I'm saying. So whatever it is that people want to do, whatever you want them to believe, this is what the big guys do. This is what the bigwigs, the muckety mucks on Parliament Hill do. And they actually, maybe not every politician does it, but the politicians will find money for a group of guys to go into a different room and then tell them how to use it. The politicians aren't the masterminds here. Politicians are quite fucking retarded, actually. But they have enough sense to find $1 million to give the scientists enough to inform their policy decisions on how, and maybe it's good stuff. Maybe actually getting Americans to eat more vegetables is a good idea. That's actually a choice architecture system. All of us listening to this can probably think of a choice architecture system that would benefit society, to encourage people to buy local. Let's think about that. I was walking through the city the other day and I saw, in Toronto and even small towns, buy local, support local businesses. They're just blaring that at you. Why? I've never been explained why. Right? I know it's good. I know I should, because, people like us have read into it. We've researched it. But for your average person, tell me why I should buy local. What actually is the benefit? And it might sound like it's obvious, but it's not obvious. Nothing is obvious.
It's people are reading Culture of Critique. It's.
Yeah. Yeah, start with that. Start by establishing social proof. And that's a side thing that they mentioned here. Establishing social proof is very, very important in choice architecture to make it seem like other people are doing something as well. A lot of this is marketing stuff, but a lot of this is, when you say marketing, you just think products, CPG, we call them consumer packaged goods. That's what it's referred to as in the industry. But no, this is politics writ large. This is you. I'll give you an example from municipal politics. If anyone's interested, anyone's ever dealt with municipal politics, you'll know this is true. They'll have these things called public engagements. So a public engagement is, we want to do something. We want to, for example, phase out black garbage bags, or we want to encourage more people to recycle, or anything like that. We'll have a public engagement, and that is ostensibly a way for the community to come to a big meeting and air their piece. And if you ever watched the show Parks and Recreation, you've probably seen this. And you've probably seen this 100 times where, the city council sits there and a bunch of crazies get up and grab the mic and lecture them and stuff. And you get that. But they go into this knowing like, okay, we're going to say we do a public engagement. We're going to open the floor to the public. But we know, A, most people are not going to come. They just have no interest in it. B, the people that do come and oppose us will look crazy. And that we're just going to do what we want to do. But we've introduced this false choice here. Like we said, we had a public engagement, and then a bunch of crazy people show up. They could, if they wanted to, create a better choice architecture that got more opinions from the general public. But they chose a choice architecture where you have to show up at 9 p.m., because all of these fucking meetings are held at night, by the way. At night in the middle of the week on a Wednesday at 9 p.m. They go sometimes till after midnight. So they do that on purpose. That's not just because we couldn't fit in. If you'd wanted to, you could have more of the public, but you kind of chose not to, but created this choice architecture system where you have plausible deniability. And that's what it is at all levels of this, creating plausible deniability with fake choices. And that's that. But then also, if you want to guide people's decision making, with that whole public engagement thing, people hear that and they think, oh, well, I guess people must like it. They've created false social proof. And all I'm saying is, we can look at these tactics and use them for ourselves if we want to. Now, some of them can't be done without a government infrastructure, obviously, but I think you can use these in conversations. And you can be aware of the tactics that are being used to you. And this is all like the green energy, eat the bug, all the stuff people talk about in the memes, eating the bugs and things like that. We actually see where these go wrong. We see them where maybe the choice architecture falls apart and they've overreached and they got a bit too cocky. But no, this is happening at all levels. This is, people being interested in eating less meat over time, little things like that. And I think that here's one thing that has come up recently on various channels and various, thought leaders and whatnot. When we talk about the managerial class, when we talk about society is increasing in complexity. Now, there's been some statements made against that, which are valid, that they'll say, for example, actually, society is not becoming more complex. It's becoming less complex. It's becoming more streamlined and stupider, and it's actually collapsing, and this is what it looks like. Sure. Okay, fair. But when we say things are increasing in complexity, we'll say like they actually are increasing in bureaucratic complexity. And the trick is that the smarter and more aware people get, the more our society and system must become more complicated to facilitate that. So the reason choice architecture and subtle little manipulation exists is because the general public is very aware of overt control. And maybe in the past, we didn't have the wherewithal or the education to push back against overt control. So now we do that, but we don't have the wherewithal to push back against minor long-term manipulative control. And one day, perhaps we will. And that's kind of what a lot of us are doing right now. But the system will have to increase in more complexity in that direction to keep us, keep this whole thing going. So sometimes when we say, the managerial class is expanding, things are increasing in complexity. It's not necessarily more technical. It's not like it's becoming more advanced technologically. It's becoming more advanced to stay ahead of people's education and enlightenment, So as we all become aware of the subtle ways we're manipulated, manipulation will continue on, but in a new, more advanced form is kind of what I'm saying. And so, we're trying to stay ahead of it, but we need to stay ahead of like what new psychological shit the CIA is working on, for example. The World Economic Forum, for example, is like they're just saying it to people what they want to do, but be sure that there are studies taking place right now to figure out how to manipulate masses in more, effective ways. That's kind of what we were getting at when we talk about complexity. And that's why, like, we hate lies. We hate manipulation. We hate lies. And that's why I say choice architecture is beyond lies. I don't think there's a lot of social capital to be had in ferreting out when people are hypocrites or lying, because someone's hypocrisy might be part of a larger choice architecture. This is beyond lies. This is them creating a system where you can lie to yourself. There is no liar. There's only a choice architect who makes you believe in something that's not true, that you constructed yourself, like putting you in like an AI matrix where you fill everything with your own memories. You see, so like a lot of the thing when we're trying to look at the systems of control in society, we're still locked in like a 19th century, feudalist way of doing things, where it's like, oh, there's a cop cracking someone's head. I'm like, that's bad, but there's way more. And we talked about like de Juvenel's, high-low versus middle stuff and all this stuff. That's still kind of old hat. You know what I mean? Like there's still all kinds of crazy social manipulation and just looking for people who lie and are wrong. It's like, I guess that's something, but that's not everything. And so, and they kind of know this is like, if anyone's familiar with UX design, this is how choice architecture works, where I've worked with a lot of developers. I've worked in some tech companies. And if you've ever designed an app, you'll come against this in a practical way, where if you've ever known a developer, or if you are a developer, you'll create the perfect app and it makes perfect sense. It's symmetrical, it's well designed, but for some reason people don't use it that way. It doesn't even make sense. A lot of people, even when the whole vertical video trend, like a lot of photography guys will correctly point out that a horizontal oriented photograph is visually better, but people just wanted to take vertical videos, so the technology had to adapt. And there's so many developers who beat their heads against the wall, like, why don't people behave in a perfect way? Why aren't people out of the box more reasonable like I am? And it's like, well, I know it sucks, but you need to design tech for stupid people. So this is like UX design for society. So I want them to do this. Okay, well, you need to realize that people look at things and they interact a certain way. Scrolling up and down makes sense. Scrolling horizontally doesn't make sense to people. We've tried it. I've done a lot of web design. Horizontal scrolling is really, really good. I like it. No one uses horizontal scrolling. It's only up and down. You think it would make sense because people read left to right, but for one reason, they don't want to do horizontal. It bothers them. They get frustrated. They punch their fucking screen. So you got to design websites a certain way, and that's why all websites are designed the same way right now. But that's really how it's done. And then if you want to change how people engage with websites, you got to say, let's change it over the course of 10 years with little design nudges and things like that. Another thing that they talk about in this that ties into that completely is the idea of sludge. So as you're trying to guide people to make the decision you want to do, you introduce this thing called sludge, which makes it difficult for them to do things that you don't want them to do. And this is very evident in politics too. So, a great example of this would be smoking laws. People will say that, the number one reason people stop smoking is because of the extra sin tax on smoking. It's like, kind of, what helped more was making it so people can smoke in fewer and fewer places. What they could do is like making it so it's actually more difficult to smoke in your everyday life. The money is one thing, but money doesn't really change things. Money is actually too simple, because if it's just a tax, people can rise up against that. But if you introduce like a bunch of different sludges in society that make it difficult, people don't want to go over there, then you modify their behavior that way. And this is evident in like how easy it is to join a mailing list and how difficult it is to get off of a mailing list, stuff like that. So that's why if something is difficult to do in society, that is also on purpose, and it sounds obvious to people. It sounds obvious, like, oh, why wouldn't they do that? Of course, but like realize that it's on a granular level with everything. And some people will hear that and think, oh yeah, like voting by mail, sure, or like voting. The leftists will agree with that and say, oh, it's like introducing. You have to have IDs to vote and stuff. I'm like, they can take that. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like other stuff, and everything that we don't like too. So you could say I actually do think voting laws make sense. Like requiring an ID to vote seems simple. I don't think you could actually make that system simpler unless you destroy that system, which is what they want to do. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that when it comes to like designing systems to convince people to do or believe something. This is what the big boys are doing. And if there's a way we can adopt that into what we're doing, whether or not you are trying to educate people on something, to red pill them, I don't like using that term, but whatever, make it easy for people to do the things you want them to do, and introduce false decisions and guide their thinking with these sort of false decisions. Anyway, that's just, you can say it can be used for evil. Everyone knows that's used for evil. Everyone hears social manipulation, and that's a wicked thing to do. But the argument can be made that every society has done that. And the only difference is they're less overt now. Before, throughout history, you could say, yeah, it was done just by force. It was done by guards. It was done by the police to crack you over the skull to get you to do something.
Yeah.
That's essentially the same, but it's more nuanced. It's more soft, but it's still the same.
And if your strategy is to go through the world and the economy playing their game, this is now part of the toolkit. So, ignore this tool at your own peril, or play a different game outside of their system. But if you're going to play their system, if you're going to run a large company, if you're going to run a political organization, which is supposed to fit into modern democracies, which is supposed to fit into, normal society, this is something you have to use, because they're using it against you. So you have to.
And we have evolved to be that way. And we've talked about this before about how living in the society has changed how we think on I believe, a physical level. Like the shape, it sounds silly when I say this, but the shape of our brains are different than they were like 100 years ago. We've had to adapt psychologically to, I would argue, a schizophrenic world. So if we want to guide people within that system, we need to be aware of the tactics that are used against us or even for us, because like I was saying, you can use this framework to do good things. You actually could use this framework if you were running the government to get people more in shape, to get them buying local, to get them, having more families. Like the way you guide people to having bigger families, perhaps at a younger age, would be doing something like this, which is introducing these sort of guide their thought process instead of just screaming at them. Because I think people have realized that the way we've advanced in society is we're very sensitive to people screaming at us. That's why, Brave New World is a more accurate model of the future than 1984. This living in an oppressive, we're very sensitive. Like, remember when Trump was elected, they said there's going to be Trump Zeppelins everywhere. There's going to be Trump's face on a flag. And it's like, no, you are thinking like a 19th century person. This isn't even 20th century. This is 19th century thinking. Like, you're looking for a bad guy who wants to show up in a crown. And a lot of the guys that we dislike, like Trudeau's just bad at it. Biden's just bad at it. They're just dumb. We're actually kind of lucky we got dumb guys in charge.
Yeah.
There's lots of very bad elites that we have, and they're the ones we kind of point and laugh at and say, fuck them. I'm like, no, well, pay attention to the forms of manipulation and control by the guys who aren't stupid, who aren't just doddering old fools. Like George Soros might be very well have dementia right now. George Soros might be just an old retard, but look at who's behind him, and what forms of choice architecture do you think could evolve in the next 10 years? What false dichotomies could be introduced to, let's say, a right-wing minded person, to a nationalist person? Because I think it wouldn't take, I'm doing this right now for fun. We're thinking of ways we could get the right-wing minded people stuck in these quagmires. Maybe that's what this Duginism shit's about. People spending all their time thinking Alexander Dugin is going to kill all white people. Maybe that's a bit of choice architecture, so we're not talking about things that are important.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know. Anyway,
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.